CEO of General Motors says tariffs will cost the company up to $5 billion this year. Those estimates were shared in a letter to shareholders today.
It did not start with a press conference. It started with silence. On May 29, 2025, workers showed up to their shifts at General Motors plants across the United States, only to be told that the line would not start today or tomorrow or next week. There was no strike, no storm, just a quiet announcement from GM headquarters that hit like a bomb. The company would be shutting down multiple production lines across the country indefinitely. The reason? A perfect storm of collapsing demand, rising costs, missing parts, and political chaos. And the fallout is already spreading from Detroit to Mexico, from Capitol Hill to Wall Street. And in the center of it all, a former president turned trade warrior, standing by his policy with a reaction that no one expected. Before we continue, hit that like button to help us beat the YouTube algorithm and to show your support. It began with tariffs. Over the past several months, Donald Trump's administration had ratcheted up duties on nearly every component GM uses to build vehicles, from steel and aluminum to semiconductors, wiring harnesses, and brake systems. The average imported part was now 25% more expensive, and for some categories, especially those sourced from China, the cost was nearly double what it had been a year earlier. At first, GM tried to absorb the hit. Chief Executive Officer Mary Barra promised to keep consumer prices steady. The company shuffled sourcing contracts, moved supply lines, cut back marketing. They even announced plans to build more parts domestically. But it was not enough. By May 1st, GM had revised its financial outlook for the year, warning investors that tariffs would add $4 to $5 billion in unexpected expenses. This warning from the CEO of the nation's largest automaker, General Motors, about the impact of the tariffs on the car industry. Mary Barrett told shareholders the tariffs on imported cars and auto parts will cost GM between $4 to $5 billion this year alone. 1 week later, GM quietly paused operations at its Ontario electric van plant, laying off 500 workers. More bad news for Canada's auto industry. The GM plant in Ingersoll, which is near London, Ontario, employs around 1,200 people, and nearly half of those are being laid off indefinitely. 2 days later, it idled production of the Hummer EV and Silverado electric pickup at its Detroit Factory Zero site. Another 200 jobs gone. And then came today, a full halt in U.S. production. The reason? The company simply could not build vehicles fast enough or cheaply enough to make it worthwhile. Parts were delayed, costs were unpredictable, and consumer demand was starting to crack under the weight of higher prices and economic fear. The shutdown affects thousands of workers. It ripples through tens of thousands more in parts manufacturing, shipping, supply chain logistics, dealership networks, and small-town economies already teetering from previous layoffs. And for the auto industry, it is more than a setback. It is a shockwave. Because GM is not just any automaker, it is a symbol of American manufacturing. It is the company the federal government once bailed out. It is the company that pledged to go all electric by 2035. And it is now the company that has at least temporarily surrendered to a policy environment it can no longer navigate. The tariffs were just the start. Alongside them came a rollback of electric vehicle subsidies, no more $7,500 tax credits, no more federal incentives to buy an EV. At the same time, battery costs remained high, competition from China surged, and suddenly, GM found itself trying to sell $65,000 electric pickups in a market that could not support them. Inventory started to rise, margins began to fall, and factories went dark. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button to show your support to the channel. The reaction from workers was immediate. In Michigan, some simply cried. In Tennessee, they gathered in small groups, asking union reps if this was the beginning of another Lordstown-style abandonment. In Indiana, workers reported being told to take your tools and wait for the call. Unions, still recovering from the bruising 2023 strike, expressed outrage. The United Auto Workers issued a statement calling the shutdown unjustified and devastating. Canadian union leaders accused GM of playing political games with workers' lives. And then came the reaction everyone was waiting for. Donald Trump took the stage at a campaign-style rally in Pennsylvania. Reporters asked him directly, "What do you think of GM shutting down U.S. production?" His answer was calm, almost too calm. "I do not like what they did," he said. "We have done everything to support these companies and still they shut down, but that is on them. They could have built more here. They chose not to." They made their choices. We are making ours. He did not rage, he did not threaten, he did not repeat his 2018 tweet about cutting all GM subsidies. Instead, he hinted almost cryptically that his administration might be preparing new incentives for automakers who invest properly. That was it. No apology, no pivot, no policy change. The message was clear. The administration stands by its tariffs, and if companies cannot adapt, that is their problem. Inside GM, sources said the company had expected more. Some had hoped Trump would offer relief, another exemption, a temporary rebate, maybe even a walk back on parts tariffs. Instead, they got a shrug. And on Wall Street, the market responded. GM stock dropped 5% in the opening hour. Ford followed. Stellantis fell by 3%. Analysts rushed to revise their forecasts. One declared this the beginning of the auto retrenchment era. Another said this is what it looks like when trade war becomes industrial collapse. Across the country, the shock is turning to fear. In Texas, a shipping contractor for GM's Arlington plant said he had already been told to prepare for cutbacks. In Ohio, a parts supplier said 3 orders had been canceled this morning. In Illinois, a dealership reported that customers were walking away from EVs entirely, fearing they would not be able to service them. And this may be only the beginning. Industry insiders say other automakers are reviewing their production plans now. Ford is said to be holding emergency meetings. Toyota has warned that if tariffs extend to Japanese components next month as rumored, they too may scale. So, what comes next for GM? Some say this is temporary, that production will resume in June, that supply chain kinks will work themselves out, and that tariffs will be reduced after the trade truce expires in July. But others are less certain. They point to the warning signs, not just from GM, but from the entire manufacturing sector. Factory output has fallen for 3 straight months. Freight volumes are down, retail demand is softening, and GDP projections have been revised downward across the board. This is not just a GM problem, it is a policy problem, and it is now an American problem. Because when the country's largest automaker shuts down production, the message it sends to workers, to investors, to consumers is not one of strength. It is a signal of systemic stress. And when the response from the top is little more than a shrug, the message is even clearer: adapt or disappear. But for many workers, it is not that simple. They cannot adapt overnight. They have mortgages, kids, healthcare plans. They are not CEOs. They are not lobbyists. They are line workers. They build, they ship, they paint, they test. And now they wait. And they are asking the same question over and over again. When does this end? Is there a plan? Is there a strategy? Or is there just chaos dressed up in the language of nationalism? The economic ripple effect is already showing up in small towns. In Michigan, a diner next to a shuttered GM facility said breakfast traffic was down 40%. In Indiana, a tool and die shop that builds molds for GM parts said it may lay off half its staff if the line does not restart soon. In Kentucky, a logistics company canceled its next round of driver hires. It is spreading quietly, relentlessly. And yet, the political war over who is to blame continues. Trump insists GM is responsible. GM insists it is responding to policy. Unions insist workers are the collateral damage. And consumers, caught in the middle, are seeing fewer cars, higher prices, and longer waits. It is not just an economic event. It is a psychological one. A reminder that even the biggest companies can falter, that even the most stable jobs can vanish, that in the age of policy by tweet, the assembly line can be stopped not by steel shortages or pandemics, but by a White House press release. Stay alert, stay skeptical, and remember that the story is not over. Because somewhere, in a darkened factory right now, the machines are off, the line is quiet, and a worker is standing next to a paused conveyor belt, wondering if it will ever start again.